The world of hunters was one of danger and power, where gates to monstrous realms appeared without warning, spewing forth creatures that threatened humanity's survival. Among these hunters, none had risen as swiftly or as fearsomely as Sung Jinwoo, once the weakest E rank, now a shadow monarch in his own right. His name carried weight, whispered in awe by allies and enemies alike. But even legends faced challenges, and Jinwoo's next battle loomed on the horizon, a confrontation with the enigmatic Phantom Monarch, a being whose very existence defied the natural order. The city's skyline stretched before Jinwoo, its neon glow dimmed by the thick miasma emanating from the latest S-rank gate. The air crackled with malevolent energy, and the ground trembled beneath his boots as he stepped forward, his shadow soldiers materializing in silent obedience. His senses sharpened, detecting the faintest disturbances, every flicker of movement, every shift in the wind. This was his domain, and he would not falter. Across the shattered plaza, the Phantom Monarch emerged, a spectral figure wreathed in violet flames. Its hollow eyes locked onto Jinwoo, and a voice like grinding bones echoed through the ruins. "You have grown stronger, little hunter. But strength alone will not save you from what comes." The taunt was deliberate, laced with something deeper, a warning, or perhaps a prophecy. Jinwoo didn't respond with words. Instead, he moved. His body blurred, crossing the distance in an instant, daggers of condensed shadow forming in his hands. The first strike aimed for the monarch's throat, but the creature vanished, reappearing behind him with a mocking laugh. A whip of violet fire lashed out, but Jinwoo twisted midair, his reflexes honed through countless battles. Shadows surged from the ground, intercepting the attack before it could sear his flesh. The battle unfolded like a deadly dance, Jinwoo's relentless assaults met with the monarch's eerie intangibility. Each time his blade should have found purchase, the phantom dissolved into smoke, only to reform elsewhere. Frustration flickered in Jinwoo's chest, but he forced it down. Emotion was a weakness in battle. He needed to adapt. Drawing deeper into his power, he summoned Igris, Beru, and the rest of his shadow army. They fanned out, surrounding the monarch, their presence a suffocating tide of darkness. The phantom's amusement faded, replaced by something akin to respect. "You command the dead as if they were extensions of yourself. Impressive." Jinwoo didn't waste time with praise. He signaled his forces, and they struck as one, Igris's greatsword cleaving downward, Beru's lightning-fast strikes harrying from the side, while Jinwoo himself channeled his mana into a devastating, Dominion's kick. The impact shattered the ground, sending shockwaves through the ruined city. The phantom staggered, its form flickering like a dying flame. Yet, as the dust settled, the monarch rose once more, its laughter now tinged with something darker. "You fight well, Shadow Monarch. But this is only the beginning." With those words, the sky split open, revealing a swirling abyss of writhing tendrils, an omen of something far worse. Jinwoo's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just a hunt. It was a prelude to war. And he would be ready. The air crackled with residual energy as Jinwoo stood amidst the ruins of the battlefield, his shadow soldiers flickering like ghosts in the dim light. The Phantom Monarch's laughter still echoed in his mind, a taunting reminder that their last encounter had been nothing more than a prelude. He clenched his fists, feeling the weight of his dagger, Kamish's wrath, humming with untapped power. The monarch's words haunted him, "You've only seen a fraction of what I am." Nearby, Beru knelt, his insectoid wings twitching with unease. "My king, something is wrong," he rasped. "The shadows. They're restless." Jinwoo didn't need the confirmation, he could feel it too. The usual calm of his connection to the shadow army was fraying at the edges, as if an unseen force was tugging at the threads. Before he could react, a piercing scream tore through the night. Jinwoo's head snapped toward the sound. A rift had split the sky, jagged and pulsing with violet energy. From it, a swarm of grotesque, half-formed creatures poured forth, not the Phantom Monarch's usual wraiths, but something new, something wrong. Their bodies writhed between corporeal and spectral, their twisted limbs scraping against the ground as they advanced. Defensive positions. Jinwoo barked, and his shadow surged forward. Iron, the towering golem, slammed his fists into the earth, sending a shockwave that shattered the first wave of abominations. But the creatures didn't stay down. Their mangled forms twitched, then reformed, their flesh knitting back together with sickening wet sounds. Jinwoo's stomach dropped. Regeneration? No, it's like they're being puppeted. His eyes narrowed as he caught a flicker of movement atop a crumbling tower. A figure cloaked in shifting mist, their presence distorting the air around them. The Phantom Monarch? No, this aura was different. Colder. More calculating. Then the voice slithered into his mind, oily and amused. "Ah, the mighty Shadow Monarch. How predictable. Jinwoo's blood ran cold. The figure raised a hand, and the corrupted creatures changed, their bodies twisting into grotesque parodies of his own shadow soldiers. A mocking imitation. Beru snarled, his mandibles clicking in fury. They dare mimic us? Jinwoo didn't answer. His mind raced. This wasn't just an attack, it was a message. The Phantom Monarch wasn't acting alone. Someone else was pulling strings, someone who knew exactly how to unsettle him. A blast of dark energy erupted from the tower, forcing Jinwoo to roll aside as the ground where he'd stood dissolved into nothingness. The figure vanished, leaving only laughter in their wake. Chaos erupted as the corrupted shadows lunged, their movements eerily synchronized with Jinwoo's own forces. Every strike, every dodge, they mirrored his soldiers perfectly, as if they'd been trained to counter them. Jinwoo gritted his teeth. Think. Adapt. He couldn't rely on brute strength here. He needed to outmaneuver them. Beru, flank left. Iron, disrupt their formation, aim for the ground beneath them. His commands were sharp, urgent. The shadows obeyed, but the corrupted mimics adjusted instantly, their hollow eyes gleaming with unnatural intelligence. Then came the second blow. A pulse of energy rippled through Jinwoo's connection to his army, a severing sensation, like a knife slicing through a taut wire. For a heart-stopping moment, his control wavered. The shadows staggered, their movements faltering. What the hell? The figure reappeared, closer now, their face still obscured but their satisfaction palpable. Did you truly believe your power was yours alone? Jinwoo's breath hitched. The implication was clear, someone had infiltrated his bond with the shadows. Betrayal? Or something worse? He didn't have time to dwell. The corrupted soldiers seized the opening, surging forward with renewed frenzy. Jinwoo barely managed to raise Kamish's wrath in time, the dagger screeching as it deflected a clawed strike. This wasn't just a battle, it was a trap. And if he didn't find a way to break it soon, the Phantom Monarch wouldn't even need to lift a finger to finish him. The stakes had just gotten higher. The air crackled with residual energy as Jinwoo stepped through the shattered remnants of the Phantom Monarch's last fortress, his shadow soldiers fanning out in silent formation. The battle had been brutal, the Monarch's forces whittled down to a desperate few, but the war wasn't over yet. His instincts screamed at him, something was coming. Something unexpected. Then he heard it, a low, melodic hum, almost playful, cutting through the tension. A figure emerged from the swirling mist, a man draped in a cloak of shifting colors, his grin sharp as a blade. Well. The infamous Shadow Monarch, tearing through the Monarch's toys like they're made of paper. Jinwoo's grip tightened on his dagger. This wasn't one of the Phantom Monarch's lackeys. The man moved with an unsettling grace, his presence warping the air around him like heat haze. Who are you? Call me Vesper, the man said, tilting his head. And I'm here to make things interesting. Before Jinwoo could react, Vesper vanished. No, not vanished. He slid between spaces, reappearing behind Jinwoo in a blur. A blade of pure light materialized in his hand, slashing downward. Jinwoo barely twisted in time, the edge grazing his shoulder as he countered with a shadow tendril. Vesper danced away, laughing. Fast. But let's see how you handle this. He flicked his wrist, and the ground beneath Jinwoo erupted in prismatic spears of energy. Jinwoo's shadows surged, forming a barrier, but the attack shattered through, forcing him to roll aside. His soldiers lunged at Vesper, only for the man to pirouette between them, his blade carving through shadows like they were nothing. One soldier fell, then another, dissipating into smoke. Jinwoo gritted his teeth. This wasn't just speed, Vesper was manipulating light itself, bending it to his will. A wild card, then. Not an ally, not a direct enemy, but someone playing his own game. Vesper paused, twirling his blade. You're good, but you're predictable. The Phantom Monarch's already adapting to you. Me? I'm the X-Factor. He smirked. And I've got a proposition. Jinwoo didn't lower his guard. Talk fast. Vesper's grin widened. The Monarch's got something I want. And you? You're in my way. But I'm feeling generous, fight me for it. Win, and I'll back off. Lose? He shrugged. You become my stepping stone. The challenge hung in the air, a spark igniting the tension between them. Jinwoo exhaled slowly. This changed everything. A new player with unknown motives, disrupting the fragile balance of the war. And if Vesper was this strong, who else was waiting in the wings? The fight resumed in an instant, light clashing against shadow, each strike a test of reflexes and will. Jinwoo feinted left, then lunged, his dagger aimed for Vesper's throat, only for the man to dissolve into a beam of light, reforming behind him. A kick sent Jinwoo skidding back, but he retaliated with a wave of shadow spikes. Vesper weaved through them, but one grazed his cheek, drawing blood. He touched the wound, amused. Now we're getting somewhere. Around them, the battlefield trembled, the phantom monarch's presence stirring in the distance. But for now, this was between them, a clash that would decide whose path forward remained unbroken. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and blood as Jinwoo stood amidst the ruins of what had once been a thriving city. The phantom monarch loomed before him, his skeletal form wreathed in shadows that writhed like living things. Jinwoo's grip tightened around the hilt of his dagger, his muscles coiled for the next strike. He had fought countless battles, but this one felt different, the weight of the world pressed against his shoulders, and the stakes had never been higher. The monarch's hollow laughter echoed through the desolate streets. "You've come far, little hunter," he taunted, his voice a chilling whisper that slithered into Jinwoo's ears. "But you still don't understand, do you? You're not fighting me, you're fighting fate itself." Jinwoo's instinct screamed at him to attack, but something in the monarch's words gave him pause. Before he could react, the ground beneath him trembled violently. A fissure split the earth, and from its depths surged a tide of spectral warriors, fallen hunters Jinwoo had once known, their eyes empty, their movements puppeteered by the monarch's will. His breath hitched as he recognized faces among them, comrades, allies, even those he had failed to save. A sharp pain lanced through his chest as one of them, a former friend, lunged at him with a blade. Jinwoo barely dodged in time, but the emotional wound cut deeper than any physical one could. "You're using them as shields?" he snarled, his voice raw with fury. The monarch's grin widened. "Shields? No. This is a lesson. Every life you've touched, every battle you've fought, it was all leading to this moment. You were never the hunter, Jinwoo. You were the prey." The revelation struck like a hammer blow. Jinwoo's mind raced, reassessing every encounter, every victory. Had he been manipulated from the start? His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of betrayal. The monarch hadn't just been biding his time, he had been orchestrating Jinwoo's rise, ensuring he was strong enough to be a worthy opponent, but never strong enough to win. The undead hunters closed in, their movements synchronized, their attacks relentless. Jinwoo parried and countered, but each strike he landed felt hollow. These weren't mindless monsters, they were people he had once fought beside. His hesitation cost him. A blade grazed his ribs, another slashed across his thigh. Blood seeped into his clothes, his vision swimming with pain and doubt. Then, a voice cut through the chaos, familiar, desperate. "Jinwoo. Don't listen to him." He turned just in time to see Cha Haein breaking through the horde, her sword blazing with radiant energy. She fought with a ferocity he had never seen before, her strikes precise, her movements fueled by sheer determination. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered in his chest. But the monarch's laughter returned, darker than before. "Ah, the loyal knight arrives," he mused. "How touching. But tell me, little hunter, would you sacrifice her too?" Before Jinwoo could react, the monarch raised a skeletal hand. Shadows erupted from the ground, ensnaring Cha Haein mid-stride. She gasped as tendrils of darkness coiled around her limbs, lifting her into the air. Her sword clattered to the ground, her struggles growing weaker by the second. Jinwoo's heart lurched. "Let her go," he roared, charging forward, only to be slammed backward by an invisible force. The monarch's power was absolute, his control over the battlefield unchallenged. "Choose, Jinwoo," the monarch hissed. "Continue this futile fight and watch her die, or surrender and spare her life. The outcome is the same, you lose." Jinwoo's mind raced. Every instinct told him to fight, but the cost was too high. Cha Haein's pained breaths filled his ears, her face twisted in agony. He had faced impossible odds before, but never like this. Never when the price of defiance was someone he cared about. Then, a memory surfaced, a lesson from his past. "The strongest weapon isn't strength," his mentor had once said. "It's the will to endure, even when all seems lost." Jinwoo's eyes hardened. The monarch had underestimated him, not just his power, but his resolve. If the enemy wanted him to choose between fighting and surrendering, then Jinwoo would choose neither. He would rewrite the rules. With a surge of mana, he activated Shadow Exchange, swapping places with one of his own shadows lurking near the monarch's blind spot. In the split second before the monarch realized what had happened, Jinwoo drove his dagger into the creature's spine. The monarch howled, his control wavering just enough for Cha Haein to break free. She landed in a roll, snatching up her sword and joining Jinwoo's side. "Took you long enough, she muttered, though relief flickered in her eyes. Jinwoo smirked, despite the pain. Had to make it dramatic. The monarch staggered, his form flickering between solid and ethereal. You dare. Jinwoo didn't let him finish. He lunged again, this time aiming for the monarch's core. But the monarch, even wounded, was still a monarch. With a roar, he unleashed a wave of necrotic energy, sending both hunters flying. Jinwoo hit the ground hard, his ribs screaming in protest. Cha Hae-in wasn't faring much better, her armor cracked, her breaths ragged. We can't win like this, she gasped. Jinwoo knew she was right. The monarch wasn't just strong, he was playing an entirely different game. But if brute force wouldn't work, then maybe strategy would. His eyes darted to the ruins around them, to the remnants of the city's magic-infused structures. An idea formed, a reckless, desperate plan. Buy me 30 seconds, he said, locking eyes with Cha Hae-in. She didn't ask why. She just nodded, pushing herself to her feet and raising her sword. Make it count. As she charged the monarch, drawing his attention with a flurry of attacks, Jinwoo focused. He channeled every ounce of his remaining mana, weaving it into the ground beneath him. The city had once been a hub of magical energy, abandoned, but not empty. If he could tap into the latent power buried beneath the rubble, he might just have a chance. The earth trembled as ancient runes flared to life, their glow intensifying with each passing second. The monarch sensed the shift too late. He turned just as Jinwoo unleashed, Domain of the Monarch, a technique he had never dared to use before, one that demanded everything from him. The world exploded in light and shadow. The monarch shrieked as his own power was turned against him, his form unraveling under the sheer force of Jinwoo's will. But the victory came at a cost. Jinwoo felt his body breaking, his vision darkening at the edges. As the dust settled, the phantom monarch was gone, for now. But Jinwoo collapsed to his knees, his strength spent. Cha Hae-in rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she gripped his shoulders. You idiot, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You could have died. Jinwoo managed a weak smile. Still. Here. But the battle wasn't over. The monarch's final words lingered in the air like a curse. This is only the beginning. And as Jinwoo stared at the horizon, where new shadows were already gathering, he knew the true fight had just begun. The air crackled with residual energy as Jinwoo stood amidst the ruins of the battlefield, his shadow soldiers regrouping around him. The phantom monarch's laughter still echoed in his mind, a taunting reminder of their last encounter. The monarch hadn't just escaped, he'd left behind a dire warning. The gates were destabilizing, and within 3 days, the final barrier between the human world and the monarch's army would collapse. Time was no longer a luxury, it was a noose tightening around their necks. Jinwoo clenched his fists, the shadows writhing beneath his skin like living things. He needed to be stronger. Fast. The monarch had shrugged off attacks that would have obliterated S-rank hunters, his regeneration outpacing even Jinwoo's relentless assault. There had to be a weakness, something they'd missed. Turning to Igris, who stood silently at his side, Jinwoo spoke, his voice low but urgent. Gather the commanders. We're not waiting for them to come to us, we're taking the fight to their doorstep. Meanwhile, Thomas Andre and the other hunters were already mobilizing. The Hunters Association had transformed into a war room, maps and reports strewn across tables as strategists scrambled for answers. We've got scouts reporting increased monster activity near the Jeju Island Gate, Cha Hae-in said, her fingers tracing the red markers on the map. If the monarch's forces are concentrating there, it's our best shot at cutting the head off the snake before the gates fully open. Thomas cracked his knuckles, his usual bravado tempered by grim focus. Then we hit them hard and fast. But we can't just brute force this, that bastard's got tricks we haven't even seen yet. Jinwoo nodded. Which is why we train. No rest, no hesitation. We've got 3 days to find a way to kill something that shouldn't exist. The training grounds were a maelstrom of motion. Jinwoo pushed himself beyond limits, his daggers flashing as he sparred against Igris and Beru simultaneously. Every strike, every counter was calculated, testing new angles, probing for gaps in the monarch's defenses. He'd noticed something during their last fight, the monarch's regeneration slowed when hit with consecutive attacks in the same spot. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Nearby, Cha Hae-in and Thomas drilled with the other hunters, their movements sharpened by desperation. Again. Thomas barked, launching a punch that sent shockwaves through the ground. Cha twisted midair, her sword carving a silver arc as she aimed for an imaginary weak point. They couldn't afford mistakes. Then came the breakthrough. While reviewing footage from the last battle, Jinwoo's eyes locked onto a fleeting moment, the Monarch's momentary stagger when a blast of pure mana disrupted his shadow tendrils. That's it, Jinwoo muttered. He's vulnerable to concentrated mana overload. We need to hit him with everything at once, no pauses, no let-up. The final hours arrived like a storm. The skies above Jeju Island darkened as the gate pulsed ominously, its edges fraying like torn fabric. Jinwoo and the hunters stood at the precipice, their resolve steeled. Remember the plan, Jinwoo said, his voice cutting through the tension. We overwhelm him, disrupt his regeneration, and finish this before the gate fully opens. If we fail. We won't, Cha interrupted, her grip tightening on her sword. With a shared nod, they stepped through the gate. The other side was a nightmare-given form, a wasteland of writhing shadows and towering spires, the phantom monarch perched atop a throne of bones. His crimson eyes gleamed as he rose to meet them. Ah, the persistent little ant's return. How predictable. Jinwoo didn't waste words. He moved. Shadows erupted from the ground, lashing out as Beru and Igris flanked the monarch. Thomas and Cha struck from opposite sides, their attacks timed to split the monarch's focus. The monarch laughed, swatting them aside like insects, until Jinwoo's dagger found its mark, piercing the same spot twice in rapid succession. The monarch hissed, his regeneration flickering. It's working, Cha shouted, driving her sword deep into his side. But the monarch wasn't done. With a roar, he unleashed a shockwave of dark energy, sending them sprawling. The ground trembled as the gate behind them shuddered, its cracks widening. They were out of time. Jinwoo gritted his teeth, pushing himself upright. One last gamble. Channeling every ounce of mana, he fused his shadows with raw power, creating a swirling vortex around his fist. Now. The hunters rallied, their combined assault striking as one. Light and shadow collided, the explosion blinding. For a heartbeat, silence. Then, the monarch screamed. His form wavered, cracked spider webbing across his body before he shattered like glass. But as the dust settled, the gate's collapse accelerated. They had minutes to escape. Go. Jinwoo ordered, shoving the others toward the exit as the world behind them crumbled. As they stumbled back into the human world, the gate imploded with a thunderous roar. The threat was over. For now. Breathing heavily, Jinwoo looked at his hands, still trembling with exhaustion, and then at his allies. They'd done the impossible. But as the adrenaline faded, one thought lingered: what else was waiting in the shadows? The air crackled with tension as Jinwoo stood before the towering figure of the phantom monarch, his shadow soldiers arrayed behind him like a legion of vengeful spirits. The monarch's eerie laughter echoed through the desolate battlefield, a sound that sent shivers down even the bravest warrior's spine. You've come far, little hunter, the monarch taunted, his voice dripping with malice. But this is where your story ends. Jinwoo's grip tightened around his dagger, his muscles coiled like a spring. He had trained for this moment, fought through countless battles, and now, there was no turning back. With a burst of speed that shattered the ground beneath him, Jinwoo lunged forward, his blade aimed straight for the monarch's throat. The monarch barely flinched, raising a hand as dark energy coalesced into a shield, deflecting the strike with a resounding clang. The force of the impact sent Jinwoo skidding backward, but he recovered instantly, twisting midair to avoid a retaliatory blast of necrotic energy. The ground where he had stood erupted in a geyser of black flames, the heat searing even from a distance. Jinwoo's mind raced as he analyzed the monarch's movements. His enemy was fast, but not untouchable. He needed to push harder. Igris, Beru, flank him, he commanded, and his two strongest shadows surged forward without hesitation. Igris's crimson blade carved through the air, forcing the monarch to parry, while Beru darted in from the side, his scythe-like limbs aiming for the monarch's ribs. The monarch snarled, his form blurring as he dodged and countered, but Jinwoo was already moving again, his body a blur of motion as he activated Ruler's authority to amplify his speed. The battlefield became a whirlwind of clashing steel and erupting energy. Jinwoo feinted left, then pivoted right, his dagger grazing the monarch's cheek before the creature backhanded him with enough force to send him crashing through a ruined pillar. Pain flared through his ribs, but he gritted his teeth and forced himself up. Blood trickled from his lip, but his eyes burned with determination. Not enough, he muttered. I need more. Deep within him, something responded. The system's voice echoed in his mind, danger approaching critical levels. Emergency protocols activated, a surge of power flooded his veins, his muscles swelling with newfound strength. His shadow stretched unnaturally, writhing like a living thing. The monarch paused, sensing the shift. What's this? He hissed. Jinwoo didn't answer. He moved. One moment he was across the battlefield, the next he was inches from the Monarch's face, his dagger plunging toward the creature's eye. The Monarch barely twisted away in time, but Jinwoo's other hand was already swinging, a fist wreathed in dark energy slamming into his gut. The impact sent the Monarch flying, carving a trench through the earth as he skidded to a stop. The Monarch rose slowly, his expression twisted in rage. "You dare!" He raised both hands, and the sky darkened as hundreds of spectral blades materialized above him. With a roar, he unleashed them, the projectiles screaming toward Jinwoo like a storm of death. Jinwoo's instinct screamed at him to evade, but he stood firm. His shadow soldiers leapt into the path, sacrificing themselves to block the onslaught, while Jinwoo focused. He could feel the system working overtime, his body adapting, evolving. When the last blade shattered against his reinforced aura, Jinwoo exhaled sharply, then vanished. The Monarch barely had time to react before Jinwoo reappeared above him, his leg descending like a guillotine. The kick connected with a thunderous crack, driving the Monarch into the ground. Before he could recover, Jinwoo's dagger flashed, aiming for the killing blow, but the Monarch's hand shot up, catching Jinwoo's wrist in a vice-like grip. Their faces were inches apart, the Monarch's eyes burning with fury. "You're strong," he admitted, his voice a guttural growl. "But strength alone won't save you." Jinwoo smirked. "Who said I was relying on just strength?" With a mental command, his shadows surged from beneath the Monarch, their claws and blades sinking deep. The Monarch howled, his grip loosening just enough for Jinwoo to wrench free and drive his dagger straight into the creature's chest. A shockwave erupted, the force sending both combatants flying in opposite directions. Jinwoo rolled to his feet, panting, his body aching but his spirit unbroken. The Monarch staggered upright, dark ichor oozing from his wound. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. Jinwoo didn't give him a chance to recover. He charged again, his movements a blur, his strikes relentless. The Monarch fought back with desperate fury, but Jinwoo was faster, stronger, more precise. Every clash of their weapons sent sparks flying, every impact shook the battlefield. Then, in a final, decisive moment, Jinwoo saw his opening. The Monarch overextended, his guard slipping for just a fraction of a second. Jinwoo didn't hesitate. He channeled every ounce of his power into one last strike, his dagger plunging deep into the Monarch's heart. The world seemed to hold its breath. The Monarch's eyes widened, his body shuddering as dark energy erupted from the wound. "Impossible," he gasped. Jinwoo leaned in, his voice cold. "This hunt is over." With a final burst of power, the Phantom Monarch exploded into dissipating shadows, his reign of terror ended at last. Jinwoo stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving, his body battered but victorious. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The air crackled with residual energy as Jinwoo stood amidst the ruins of the battlefield, his breath ragged, his body aching from countless wounds. The Phantom Monarch loomed before him, a towering specter of death, its hollow eyes burning with malice. The final hunt had reached its climax, and neither hunter nor prey would walk away unscathed. Jinwoo's fingers tightened around the hilt of his dagger, the blade slick with shadow and blood. He could feel the weight of every battle leading to this moment, the fallen comrades, the relentless training, the sacrifices. This was it. The defining strike. The Phantom Monarch lunged, its massive scythe carving through the air with a shriek. Jinwoo barely dodged, the edge grazing his shoulder, sending a jolt of searing pain through his nerves. He gritted his teeth and countered, his dagger flashing like liquid darkness. The clash of steel against spectral energy sent shockwaves rippling through the shattered battlefield, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Each exchange was a dance of death, precision and brutality intertwined. Jinwoo's muscles screamed in protest, his stamina pushed beyond human limits, but he refused to yield. Not when so much hung in the balance. Memories flashed through his mind, his mother's smile, his sister's laughter, the faces of those he'd failed to protect. The Phantom Monarch wasn't just another enemy, it was the embodiment of everything he'd fought against. And now, at the brink of exhaustion, Jinwoo felt something shift within him. A spark. A final surge of power, buried deep, waiting for this very moment. His shadow soldiers, though battered and broken, rallied around him, their loyalty unshaken. They were his strength, his resolve given form. With a roar, Jinwoo channeled every ounce of energy left in his body. His dagger gleamed with an eerie light, shadows writhing along its edge like living tendrils. The Phantom Monarch hesitated, just for an instant, but it was enough. Jinwoo struck, his blade piercing the Monarch's core. A deafening explosion of energy erupted, the force hurling Jinwoo backward as the Phantom Monarch let out an unearthly wail. The sky itself seemed to fracture, reality bending under the strain of their clash. When the dust settled, Jinwoo lay on his back, his vision blurred, his body numb. The Phantom Monarch staggered, its form flickering between existence and oblivion. It wasn't dead, not yet, but the wound was fatal. The battle wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Jinwoo forced himself to his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had done it. He had pushed beyond his limits, and in doing so, he had carved a path to victory. The Phantom Monarch's hollow voice echoed across the battlefield, a final whisper of defiance. This is not the end. Jinwoo didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth was written in the ruins around them, in the blood staining the earth, in the unbroken will of a hunter who refused to fall. He had come too far to stop now. As the remnants of the Monarch's army began to retreat, Jinwoo allowed himself a single, exhausted smile. The final hunt was nearing its conclusion, but the true battle, the one for the future, was just beginning. And he would be ready. The air still crackled with residual energy from Jinwoo's final strike against the Phantom Monarch, the battlefield littered with the remnants of shattered shadows and crumbling ruins. His chest heaved, muscles burning from exertion, but the victory felt hollow. The Monarch's dying laughter echoed in his mind, a taunt that lingered like poison. "You've only hastened the end," it had whispered before dissolving into smoke. Around him, the surviving hunters sagged under their own wounds, their faces etched with exhaustion and disbelief. They had won, but at what cost? The sky, once choked with the Monarch's miasma, now swirled with an eerie, unfamiliar light, as if the world itself had been wounded by their clash. Cha Hae-in staggered to his side, her sword trembling in her grip. "Jinwoo. Something's wrong," she gasped, her eyes darting to the horizon. The ground beneath them shuddered, not from aftershocks but from something new, something waking. A low, guttural growl reverberated through the ruins, and the shadows at their feet writhed unnaturally, twisting into shapes that defied logic. Then, with a deafening roar, the earth split open, and from the fissure emerged a creature none of them had ever seen, a monstrous amalgamation of the Phantom Monarch's lingering essence and the raw, chaotic energy of the rift Jinwoo had torn open in his desperation to end the fight. Its form shifted constantly, limbs elongating and retracting, eyes blinking in and out of existence across its body. The hunters recoiled, their weapons raised but their resolve fraying. This wasn't just another foe, this was a consequence, a backlash from the system itself. Jinwoo's fists clenched. He had pushed too far, and now the world was pushing back. The creature lunged without warning, a blur of jagged edges and grasping tendrils. Jinwoo barely dodged, rolling aside as the ground where he'd stood erupted in a geyser of blackened energy. Cha Hae-in slashed at one of its limbs, but her blade passed through like mist, the wound sealing instantly. "Physical attacks aren't working," she shouted. Jinwoo's mind raced. If this thing was born from the rift, then maybe the environment was the key. His eyes darted to the unstable remnants of the Monarch's fortress, its spires leaning precariously, its foundations weakened by their battle. "Fall back. Lead it toward the ruins," he commanded, his voice cutting through the panic. The hunters scattered, baiting the creature with bursts of magic and gunfire, drawing it toward the crumbling structure. Jinwoo dashed ahead, his shadow soldiers rising to harry the beast, buying him seconds. He vaulted onto a half-collapsed wall, then leapt onto a teetering pillar, his muscles screaming in protest. The creature followed, its form pulsing with erratic energy. Just a little closer. With a grunt, Jinwoo slammed his fist into the pillar's base, the impact amplified by his remaining strength. The stone groaned, then toppled, right onto the creature. The spire shattered across its shifting body, and for a moment, it seemed to falter, its form flickering like a dying flame. But then it roared, the debris dissolving into its mass, making it larger, angrier. Cha Hae-in cursed. "It's adapting." Jinwoo gritted his teeth. If brute force wouldn't work, then he'd have to outthink it. He summoned his remaining shadows, not to attack, but to weave a net of dark energy around the creature, constricting its movements. The beast thrashed, but the shadows held, if only for a moment. "Now," Jinwoo yelled. The hunters unleashed everything they had left, flames, lightning, bullets, all aimed at the unstable rift energy swirling within the creature's core. The combined assault struck true, and the creature howled as its form began to unravel, its essence destabilizing. But it wasn't over. With a final, desperate surge, the creature lashed out, a whip-like appendage slicing toward Cha Hae-in. Jinwoo moved on instinct, shoving her aside, but not fast enough. The strike grazed his shoulder, and agony exploded through his body as the corrupt energy seeped into his veins. He dropped to one knee, vision swimming. Around him, the world seemed to slow. The creature was dissipating, but the damage was done. As the last of the monstrosity faded into the air, silence fell. The hunters gathered around Jinwoo, their faces pale. Cha Hayan pressed a hand to his wound, her own fingers trembling. Jinwoo. Her voice was raw with fear. He tried to speak, but the corruption was spreading, a cold fire eating at his strength. The system, usually so responsive, remained eerily silent. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, one Jinwoo had thought long gone. Beru, his ant-like commander, stepped forward, his compound eyes reflecting the dim light. "My king," he rasped, his voice uncharacteristically solemn. "The rift's energy. It has tainted you. If it is not purged, you will become what you sought to destroy." Jinwoo's breath hitched. The Phantom Monarch's final words echoed louder now. This wasn't just a wound. It was a curse. And if he couldn't find a way to stop it, the final hunt would be for his own soul. The hunters exchanged grim glances. Alliances would shift now. Trust would be tested. And Jinwoo, for the first time in a long while, felt fear, not for himself, but for what he might do if he lost this fight. The battle was over, but the war within him had just begun. Word count, 2000. The air crackled with residual energy as Jinwoo stood amidst the ruins of the battlefield, his breath ragged, his shadow soldiers flickering like dying embers. The Phantom Monarch's laughter echoed through the shattered landscape, a sound that slithered into their bones. "You fought well, Shadow Monarch," the voice taunted, "but this hunt ends now." The ground trembled as spectral tendrils erupted, carving fissures through the earth, and from the abyss surged an army of wraiths, each one a twisted reflection of the fallen, their eyes hollow, their forms shifting like smoke. Jinwoo clenched his fists. They were exhausted, their resources depleted, but surrender wasn't an option. Beru's wings twitched at his side, his usually composed demeanor frayed. "My king, we cannot hold them off much longer." Igris, his armor cracked, nodded grimly. The others, Tank, Iron, even the normally silent Kazel, exchanged glances, their fatigue palpable. Jinwoo's mind raced. They needed a plan, something reckless enough to work. "We lure them in," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Collapse the battlefield on top of them." The shadows stirred, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. It was madness. But madness was all they had left. The Phantom Monarch's forces advanced, a tide of darkness. Jinwoo barked orders, Igris and Beru would flank, drawing the wraiths into the unstable chasms. Tank and Iron would use their brute strength to fracture the ground further, while Kazel took to the skies, harrying the enemy from above. Jinwoo himself would be the bait. "On my signal," he growled, and then he was moving, darting forward with a burst of speed, his dagger flashing as he carved through the first wave of wraiths. Their shrieks filled the air, but he didn't stop, didn't falter. The Phantom Monarch's gaze locked onto him, and Jinwoo felt the weight of that attention like a physical blow. The trap was set. Igris and Beru struck from the sides, their blades a blur, forcing the wraiths into the narrowing kill zone. Tank roared as he drove his fists into the earth, fissures spiderwebbing outward. Iron followed suit, his massive form a battering ram against the unstable terrain. Kazel dove, his talons raking through spectral flesh, buying them precious seconds. The ground groaned, then gave way, a deafening crash as the battlefield collapsed inward, swallowing wraiths by the dozen. Dust billowed, obscuring everything. For a heartbeat, Jinwoo dared to hope. Then the dust cleared, and the Phantom Monarch emerged unscathed, his form shimmering with ethereal power. Clever, he mused, but insufficient. He raised a hand, and the very air twisted, reality itself warping under his command. Jinwoo barely had time to react before a force like a mountain slammed into him, hurling him backward. His ribs screamed in protest, his vision swimming. Around him, his shadows staggered, their movement sluggish. They were running out of time. Desperation clawed at Jinwoo's throat. If brute force wouldn't work, they needed precision, a single, decisive strike. His eyes flicked to Beru, then Igris. An unspoken understanding passed between them. They would funnel every last ounce of their power into one attack. Jinwoo's dagger glowed with dark energy as he channeled his remaining strength, his shadow soldiers merging into a single, concentrated force. Igris raised his sword, its edge humming with power, while Beru's wings flared, his body alight with crackling energy. The Phantom Monarch sneered. "You still resist?" He lunged, his form dissolving into a storm of shadows. Jinwoo met him head-on, their clash sending shockwaves through the ruins. Steel met darkness, sparks flying. Igris struck from the side, his blade carving a deep gash across the Monarch's arm. Beru followed, his claws tearing through the spectral flesh. The Monarch roared, his power surging, but Jinwoo didn't let up. He pressed forward, his dagger finding its mark, sinking deep into the Monarch's chest. A guttural scream tore from the Monarch's throat as dark energy erupted from the wound. The battlefield trembled, the very fabric of reality straining. Jinwoo held on, his muscles burning, his vision darkening at the edges. Now, he shouted, and with a final, collective effort, they unleashed everything, light and shadow colliding in a cataclysmic explosion. The world went white. Then black. When Jinwoo's senses returned, he was on his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion. The Phantom Monarch lay before him, his form flickering, his power dissipating like mist in the wind. This isn't over. The Monarch hissed, before his body dissolved into nothingness. Silence. Then a groan as Beru staggered to his feet, his wings tattered. Igris leaned heavily on his sword, his armor scorched. The others were battered but alive. Jinwoo exhaled, his breath shaky. They'd done it. But as he looked toward the horizon, a new dread settled in his gut. The sky was darkening, the air thick with an oppressive weight. Something worse was coming. And they were out of time. The air crackled with tension as Jinwoo stood atop the ruins of what was once Seoul, his shadow soldiers arrayed behind him like a silent legion. The sky was a swirling maelstrom of dark energy, the Phantom Monarch's presence suffocating the land. The final battle had arrived, and there would be no retreat. The Monarch's crimson eyes gleamed from within the storm, his voice a thunderous growl. "You are but a fleeting shadow," sung Jinwoo. "This world will be mine." Jinwoo tightened his grip on his dagger, the weight of his journey pressing down on him. Every sacrifice, every loss, it all led to this moment. "No," he said, his voice steady. "This ends today." With a flick of his wrist, Jinwoo's shadow surged forward, a tidal wave of darkness crashing toward the Monarch. The Monarch raised a clawed hand, and a barrier of violet flames erupted, incinerating the first wave. But Jinwoo was already moving, his body a blur as he closed the distance. He slashed downward, his dagger trailing black energy, but the Monarch parried with a skeletal arm, the impact sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The ground shattered beneath them as they exchanged blows, each strike faster than the last. Jinwoo feinted left, then pivoted, driving his knee into the Monarch's ribs. The creature snarled, backhanding him with enough force to send him skidding across the rubble. Blood trickled from Jinwoo's lip, but he grinned. "You hit like a gate boss." The Monarch's eyes flared, and he lunged, his claws elongating into jagged spears. Jinwoo barely dodged, rolling aside as the spears impaled the ground where he'd stood. He countered with a shadow tendril, wrapping it around the Monarch's wrist and yanking him off balance. Before the Monarch could recover, Jinwoo unleashed a flurry of dagger strikes, each one carving deep gashes into the Monarch's spectral flesh. The Monarch roared, his body erupting in a shockwave of dark fire, forcing Jinwoo to leap back. The battle raged on, neither yielding. Jinwoo's shadows harried the Monarch from all sides, while the Monarch retaliated with devastating spells, reducing entire city blocks to ash. The world trembled under their clash, the very fabric of reality straining. Jinwoo could feel his energy waning, but he refused to falter. He thought of his mother, his sister, his comrades, everyone he'd fought to protect. This was his last stand. Summoning every ounce of his power, Jinwoo activated, Domain of the Monarch, the battlefield twisting into a realm of pure shadow. The Monarch hesitated, his movement slowing as the domain sapped his strength. Jinwoo didn't waste the opportunity. He channeled his remaining mana into his dagger, the blade glowing with an eerie light. "This is for everything you've taken," he whispered. With a final, desperate charge, Jinwoo plunged the dagger into the Monarch's chest. The Monarch screamed, his body convulsing as cracks of light spider-webbed across his form. But even in death, the Monarch refused to fall quietly. His hand shot out, gripping Jinwoo's throat. "If I die, you die with me," he rasped. The cracks spread to Jinwoo, searing pain lancing through him. He could feel his life force draining, his vision darkening. But then, a voice echoed in his mind, Beru's. "My king. We are with you." One by one, his shadow soldiers dissolved, their energy flowing into Jinwoo, mending his wounds, bolstering his strength. The Monarch's eyes widened in shock as Jinwoo's grip on the dagger tightened. "No. This is impossible," Jinwoo roared, pushing the blade deeper. "Nothing's impossible for a hunter." The explosion of light consumed them both. When the dust settled, Jinwoo lay amidst the ruins, the Phantom Monarch gone. The sky cleared, the first rays of dawn breaking through. His body ached, his power spent, but he was alive. Around him, the world was quiet, the battle finally over. Slowly, he sat up, his shadow soldiers nowhere to be seen, they had given everything to ensure his victory. In the days that followed, humanity began to rebuild. The gates ceased to appear, the monsters vanishing as if they had never existed. Jinwoo, now hailed as a savior, stood at the edge of a new era. He visited the graves of those lost, his heart heavy but resolute. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was bright. As the sun set over the rebuilt city, Jinwoo smiled. The hunt was over. But his story was just beginning.